I'm Greg Jarrett.
I'm Sandra Smith.
I'm Charles Payne, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, October 19th, 2022. I'm Lisa Brady. The midterm races are in the home stretch, and a close one is in North Carolina.
I like to say it's the NASCAR state, and that you don't let off the gas until you see the checkered flag, and we're not going to let up for the next 3 weeks.
I'm Dave Anthony. There is growing concern China might invade Taiwan, forcing the U.S. to make a choice. Let China take it or go to war.
We either lose all our credibility, which is going to cost lives down the road, or a lot of Americans die right up front. That's why it's so critical, 1,000 times more critical than with Ukraine, that we prevent this war from ever happening.
And I'm David Marcus. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
If Democrats keep control of Congress, President Biden says the first bill he'll send to lawmakers would make abortion rights federal law after the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade.
And when Congress passes it, I'll sign it in January, 50 years after Roe was first decided the law of the land.
The president's promise made at a DNC event Tuesday, even as the economy and inflation remain the top concern for many midterm voters.
The president's going to continue to talk about issues that matter to the American people. And abortion is one of them. Majority of the American people disagree with the decision that the Supreme Court made.
Spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre says the president is working on the economy every day. Republicans say his policies are the problem, fueling higher prices.
You know, I'm hearing about it in very real terms, not like a college professor would talk about it.
North Carolina Congressman Ted Budd is a Republican running for Senate against Democrat Cheri Beasley, former Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. The longtime incumbent, Republican Senator Richard Burr, is retiring.
I mean, just the best example is, there's a lady that commutes in from outside of Raleigh. She's 6 months away from retirement, and she says, I don't know if I can afford gas in my car to get to my job, to get to my retirement. And then maybe 6 weeks ago, kids were getting back in school. Parents were wondering, I don't know how I'm going to buy back to school clothes, a new backpack, and pay for my power bill and groceries on the table and gas in my car. So, I mean, they're talking about it in very real terms, and they know. I mean, these are people that they aren't intrinsically political, but they're saying, why are we no longer an energy exporter? Why are we not energy surplus in our country? Why would Joe Biden, months ago or a year and a half ago, kill the Keystone Pipeline? And they feel the repercussions of everything that Joe Biden has done. And, they're looking at this race and they're thinking that Cheri Beasley is just a rubber stamp for Joe Biden's policies. And why would I want to support her?
What about spending? Because that's something that, many of your Republican colleagues have said is really helping to fuel inflation. And some fiscal conservatives have complained that Republicans spent too much when they controlled the House and Senate. Why should voters trust that wouldn't happen again?
Well, I'm a fiscal conservative. I can't speak for everyone, but I can know that I voted against those big spending bills. And let's go back to what inflation is. It's too much money chasing too few goods. I think that was Milton Friedman who said that. And so when you pump too much money into the economy, but I can tell you what Joe Biden's done. He calls these things like the American Rescue Plan, which pumped nearly $2 trillion into the economy, which it wasn't necessary at the time. We were on a V-shaped recovery when he dumped it right in on top of that. And then he does these things like so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which it does nothing of the sort. It just helps rich people buy Teslas. It's completely out of touch. It fuels the Green New Deal and makes energy more expensive. So everything Joe Biden does is about spending and making it harder on people, not just in North Carolina, but around the whole country. And people are sick of it. They know. I mean, people have become well-educated economists when they're looking at their price of their grocery bill and their power bill and their fuel bill at the gas station.
Right behind inflation as a top concern in the latest Fox News polling is crime, something that voters surveyed give Republicans a double-digit edge on in terms of handling it. How would you address rising crime around the country?
Well, you have to look at both sides of it. And it's two issues, but they merge together under crime, and that's the border, which we have the cartel trafficking of drugs and fentanyl, product and primary ingredients coming from China through Mexico, and fentanyl across our border, trafficked by the cartels. human trafficking coming right in here. I mean, we're seeing 3.5, 4 million since people. That's just the known people. And then we have the gotaways that have come through our borders. And then we have about close to 100 now, just under 100 that are on the terrorist watch list. And that was maybe 1 or 2 under President Trump. So it's just infuriating because when I was down there, the Customs and Border Patrol agents, they said, we just need an administration in Washington that has our back. And they don't have that under Joe Biden. And then when I come here to North Carolina, we've got 100 counties. Sheriffs, law enforcement are coming up to me around the state, and they say every single county in North Carolina is now a border county because of Joe Biden's policies. And they realize that my opponent, Cheri Beasley, would be a complete rubber stamp. I mean, this is a person that on the bench, she defended cop killers. She threw out indictments for sex offenders. She has let child predators get out on parole without GPS tracking, let them get back on social media. And I don't know why she's chosen to, take this different path, but it's bad and it's scaring parents to death. So whether it's violent crime locally or whether that's at the border, it's all come home to roost for the Democrats' bad policies.
I know you're endorsed by multiple law enforcement groups, including the Fraternal Order of Police, the Police Benevolent Association, just to name 2. Beasley's counter to that is that you voted against funding for law enforcement in the House. What were those votes about?
Well, when you talk about spending from a topic or two ago in this conversation, when Nancy Pelosi shoves these fake messaging bills on the floor, which has billions sometimes of spending, which has very little to do with law enforcement, and then they put just a smidgen of funding in there for law enforcement. The big bills that come through, the things that protect our police, those are the things I'm for. But clearly, my opponent has done fundraisers with the leader of the Defund the Police movement. She's got a bad record, and my record has been consistent. But if Nancy Pelosi puts out this show vote just to give her members some cover and Cheri Beasley some cover, people in North Carolina aren't buying it. They're looking at everybody from the one I would add to that is the North Carolina Troopers Association, the people that put the men and women in uniform that put their lives on the line every day with law enforcement, the Police Benevolent Association, Fraternal Order of Police, and all the way down to the border. The National Border Patrol Association has just been hugely supportive of me because they know I've got their back.
We also reached out to Beasley's campaign and didn't get a response, but speaking to Fox News recently, she stood by her record as a judge, working with law enforcement and criticizing Budd's record in Congress.
Well, Congressman Budd has voted with his party 92% of the time. And, I have always vowed to be independent. I'm going to stand for what's right, I'm going to call out what's wrong, and I'm going to lead courageously.
Both candidates have had support from outside spending.
Liberal politician Cheri Beasley is coming for you and your wallet.
But Beasley's campaign raised almost 3 times as much as Budd's campaign in the most recent quarter. So is the congressman concerned about having enough funding to hit the finish line strong?
Well, the answer in politics is always you want just a little bit more, and we would love for folks to go to tedbud.com and support. We would certainly put every penny to good use here because the Democrats have wasted so much money. They have a bad habit of wasting money here in North Carolina, but we want to make sure that we are smart in how we get our message out and stay humble, work hard, and ask for people's votes. And that's why we have a slight edge. And again, we're always within the margin of error here in North Carolina, and we have to keep working hard for the next 3 weeks.
Senator Burr, who held the seat for nearly 2 decades and is not running for re-election, voted to impeach former President Trump. You, by contrast, won Trump's endorsement in the GOP primary for this seat. That connection can be a double-edged sword sometimes. Do people ask you about Trump or his policies as you've been campaigning, or is it not part of the conversation for the general election?
They ask me all the time, and I remind them that Trump won North Carolina twice. I'm honored to have received his endorsement last year. It's been a huge help. But let's go back to why he endorsed me. He endorsed me because I'm an America First candidate, and I've never wavered on those policies. Those are the policies that led to 1.4% inflation, not Joe Biden and Cheri Beasley 8 or 9% inflation. It led to low crime, reduced fentanyl deaths. It led to the lowest unemployment in history for women, people of color, and Hispanics. And we have to get back to those policies that made us a greater and greater nation.
The president keeps highlighting the issue of abortion, saying that it's a key issue for this election. Is that an issue that could help to decide this Senate race in your state?
Well, in the recent polling, it shows that more and more women are deciding to support my candidacy, and I'm very honored to receive that. But let's talk about how extreme the Democrats are on this abortion issue. They're way out of touch with North Carolina because they believe in abortion at any time, for any reason, at taxpayer expense, all the way up until the moment of birth. And if you poll North Carolinians, that's not where they are, men or women.
It seems like each party kind of leaves out the fine print on each other's positions on abortion, though. I mean, Democrats accuse Republicans of wanting a national ban, for instance. Is that something that you would support?
I've been pro-life long before I was ever in politics, but I've always been very consistent about protecting the life of a woman. And again, I just wish that she would be a little more honest when she describes my opinion.
Historically speaking, North Carolina tends to elect Republican senators. This is considered a fairly close race, though. The Fox News Power Rankings have it lean Republican. How are you feeling with less than 3 weeks to go?
I like to say it's the NASCAR state, and that you don't let off the gas until you see the checkered flag, and we're not going to let up for the next 3 weeks. We want to stay humble, work hard, stay focused, ask for people's votes, and we believe that'll get us across the finish line. But again, you're never comfortable in North Carolina. It's always close.
If there's one thing, if there's one message that you think maybe voters aren't getting or aren't hearing from you, what would it be? What would you want them to hear?
I just like them to know that everything that I have done, everything that I will do is about making their life better right here in our nation and in North Carolina. And then everything that Cheri Beasley has done and will do makes life worse for us in North Carolina, and that she is a rubber stamp for Joe Biden's policies.
North Carolina Republican Congressman Ted Budd running for Senate. Good luck with the campaign. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a great day.
This is David Marcus with your Fox News commentary coming up.
Is Taiwan the next Ukraine? China's leader more than hinted at it over the weekend.
As the wheels of history roll forward towards national reunification and the revival of the nation, the complete reunification of the motherland must be achieved and can definitely be achieved.
And President Xi Jinping went further than that in his speech to the Chinese Communist Party Congress, which will give him another 5-year term in office. He would not rule out reunification by force, taking over Taiwan, which considers itself an independent nation with its own government and military. And Republican Congressman Michael Waltz says China could invade within 5 years.
So the question is, are we running out of time from the United States standpoint to deter that from happening?
Waltz tells Fox Xi's goal is
becoming the dominant global superpower on his watch and replacing the American dream with the China dream.
Waltz is just back from a trip to Taiwan as part of a bipartisan delegation that included Congressman Seth Moulton, who is also worried about the threats.
It's a huge concern. Now, it's not a surprise. I think that those of us who have been watching China and Taiwan closely, recognizing the risk there.
Congressman Moulton is a Democrat from Massachusetts.
Xi Jinping wants to take over Taiwan. And let's be clear, reunification is his euphemism for saying invade the free country of Taiwan and put them under his authoritarian communist rule, take away their democracy, take away their freedoms. That's what Xi Jinping wants to do. And he's up the stakes because now he says he's going to do it soon.
So he also refused to rule out doing this by force, invasion. So clearly there's no other way, is there? It's not like Taiwan's going to pick up the phone and say, hey, let's unify.
Nobody in Taiwan wants this. There's a reason why the people there are independent and have a democracy, which, of course, the people in mainland China do not have. There were some apologists, I think, for the Chinese regime who said maybe there's some compromise we could work out. But once they saw what Xi Jinping did to Hong Kong, that's all over. Yeah. No one believes that anymore.
Yeah, because now China has its thumb right on Hong Kong.
China has crushed Taiwan. In fact, Xi Jinping bragged about it in his speech, about how he's put down the protests viciously and violently. So everyone who is hoping that there would be some sort of one country, two systems, and Hong Kong would maintain the freedom that the people of Hong Kong have experienced for a generation, well, that's out the window. And the people of Taiwan see that very clearly.
Why now, though? I mean, Taiwan has been independent. So why the urgency from China to do this?
Well, it's always a little dangerous to make close comparisons among different countries. But China and Russia have a lot of similarities here. They're both led by autocratic, self-aggrandizing leaders who want to make a legacy for themselves. And they're both running into economic problems at home. Russia more immediately, but China is running up against a wall where they're not going to be able to grow the way they have. So I think Putin and Xi Jinping are both looking ahead and saying, we're not going to have an economic legacy here. We're going to have rising discontent at home. A way to establish a legacy is to be like a conqueror of old and take over another country. That's what Putin is doing in Ukraine, and that's what Xi Jinping wants to do with Taiwan.
So Taiwan has a military of forces, something like 300,000. That's a tough match for China, isn't it?
I mean, that's just not enough to stop China. And that's why America has two terrible options if China invades. Either we just say, you know what? We were kidding. We're not actually going to help you, Taiwan. You're just going to fall to China. And if we do that, our credibility will be shot around the globe. We'll go from peace through strength to war through weakness. And that will cost a lot of American lives for decades to come.
All right. Well, hold on one second. What if we do like Ukraine, where we say, we will promise to help defend you. Here's a bunch of weapons. Here's air defense. Here's all of this, like we were doing with Ukraine.
Well, that's a great question, Dave, but it's not an option because we can't come after the fact to Taiwan. It's an island. China's going to blockade it off. We can't give them weapons after the fact. We can't just support them through a proxy. We don't have any way to do that.
All right. Now you said the other option, which is also bad.
Right. So the other option is that we do, in fact, just say, no, you're not going to invade. And that means we start taking out the Chinese invasion force. That means they start shooting our Navy. And
that's war.
Sadly, a lot of Americans are going to die if that happens.
That's war.
That is war. That's war with China. That's war with the greatest national security threat that we face in the coming decades. A greater threat than Russia, with a more advanced military, better technology, and the willingness to use it. So those are the two terrible options. We either lose all our credibility, which is going to cost lives down the road, or a lot of Americans die right up front. That's why it's so critical, 1,000 times more critical than with Ukraine, that we prevent this war from ever happening, that our deterrence is so effective that Xi Jinping says, nope, I'm going to lose. So I'm not going to invade.
But what? What is this deterrence? Sanctions? Well, I mean, what would possibly deter China?
Well, I think that the sanctions regime we've been able to put together against Russia is impressive. But at the end of the day, what's going to stop China is our military. It's the military threat. It's Xi Jinping looking out and seeing the United States with all of our democratic allies in the Pacific, so united against an invasion of Taiwan that he says he's just going to lose, that he's going to lose like Putin is losing right now in Ukraine, and he doesn't even try. But one of the things we were looking at on our trip here is the strategy we're being briefed in Washington to strengthen our deterrence in the Pacific. Is that actually being implemented on the ground? So we met troops. We talked to the folks who are actually carrying this out. Another question we asked is, are our partners, those allies that have always been our strength, are they ready to be with us in this fight? I think the results of that were pretty mixed. The third question was, how are we translating this preparation for war, preparation to win a war against China? How are we translating that into deterrence? And I'll tell you what, the answers are pretty sobering. We have a lot of work to do.
When you talked to Taiwan's president, obviously China, when House Speaker Pelosi went in August, they did war games, military exercises, and really very angry about that trip. How nervous are the people of Taiwan as the president?
They are very concerned. They're concerned about how quickly this could happen and whether or not they're really going to be prepared in time. We're concerned about that, whether we are going to be prepared in time. because we might be in a position to convince Xi Jinping he's going to lose this war. We might be in a position to do that in 2035. But if he decides to invade in a couple of years, that's not going to make a difference. We've got to be ready sooner. And that's the urgency that I think we all feel having returned from this trip.
What if he did it soon, knowing that a lot of the world is focused on helping Ukraine still, and the United States is focused on helping Ukraine still, and suddenly we have to worry about that?
I mean, look, it's a dangerous world out there. We can't take our eye off the ball. We're doing the right thing in Ukraine. It's critical for the defense of Europe, and we've got to continue doing it. But we got to do more in the Pacific at the same time.
Was President Biden right when he answered several times in the last year that the U.S. would defend Taiwan, American forces defend Taiwan? Was he right with that?
I think he's right. I think the Republican congressman here might actually agree with Biden more on this point than I do. I'm a little bit more hesitant, but this is one of the values going on this trip is not only do you see things, you get to talk more to your colleagues. And Congressman Waltz has made, I think, a strong case to me that it may be time to move to a position of strategic clarity where we're just unambiguous. Yes, China, if you invade, we're going to stop you.
In November, Congressman Seth Moulton is hoping to win a fifth term in Massachusetts' 6th House District. He faces a challenge from Republican Bob May, but is favored. That race not among the 33 toss-ups in the Fox News power rankings. But even if Moulton is reelected, Democrats could lose a bunch of other seats. So he knows it's quite possible and widely projected Republicans could win control of the House, maybe even the Senate in the next Congress.
Sure. Yes. I mean, I am concerned, and I'm working hard, not just on my own reelection, but to support especially veterans, especially Democratic veterans running across the country. I have an organization called Serve America that I established to do just that. But we can't let politics get in the way of national security. We can't let politics divert us from doing our fundamental job, which is protecting the American people. And I think that's something that especially veterans understand on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, and it would, let's say your party doesn't keep control of at least the House or the Senate or both. Would our Taiwan policy and what happens in Taiwan and China, do you think that would matter?
Well, it's a good question because, of course, traditionally, we've always thought of the Republican Party as more hawkish, more supportive of the military. Of course, it was Reagan who built up the military to such strength during the 1980s.
The Cold War, right.
That's right. And in contrast, we usually think of the Democrats as the ones who want to cut defense budgets. But those divisions aren't so clear anymore because it's the very conservative wing of the Republican Party that's been much more isolationist, that said we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine as much as we have been, that's saying that we shouldn't get involved in a conflict over Taiwan. And of course, it's a Democratic president, President Biden, who's had the strongest statements in defense of Taiwan of any American president ever. So the lines are blurring.
You said you're in the middle. What about the hard left within your party?
That's a concern as well. I mean, it's funny. They find themselves in an awkward position with Ukraine because they've always been kind of anti-military. And now, of course, they're supporting Ukraine. And they sometimes choose to ignore the fact that it's our defense budgets that they always vote against, which, of course, are providing that aid. So, again, this is the extremes in either party that are a risk here. I think we got to end this craziness. It's getting a little bit obscene.
Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, just back from his trip to Taiwan. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Dave.
And in other news,
I'm Gianna Gelosi. It's October, and that means Halloween is upon us. And even if we adults aged out of trick-or-treating, candy is still one of the big draws of the holiday. But when it comes to favorite candy, we are a nation divided, at least according to grocery service Instacart. It calculated the top candies based on the weight of each candy sold during October of 2021 and found Reese's Peanut Butter Cups reigned supreme. More than 116 tons were sold. Coming in second, peanut M&Ms with 92 tons sold. Instacart's data dug even deeper, revealing where you are most likely to find either of the rival peanutty, chocolatey treats. The East Coast, West Coast rivalry seeps even into our sweets, with peanut M&Ms ranking most popular on the West Coast, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups dominating the East Coast. The two exceptions are Hawaii and New Hampshire, which chose M&Ms as their favorite Halloween candy. A poll in September found 82% of Americans buy Halloween candy, whether or not they even like Halloween. Utah apparently has the biggest sweet tooth. Other states that bought the most candy, Idaho, Alaska, Montana, Washington. States with the lowest share of candy purchases were Florida, Delaware, Alabama, North Carolina, and South Carolina. 63% of Americans report they now love a Halloween candy they hated as a kid, like 29% of people who say they like licorice now. 28% say they even developed an affinity for candy corn. On the other hand, 59% now say they hate a type of Halloween candy they loved as a kid. 27% grew out of their candy corn phase. 21% now dislike chewing gum and sour candy. And if you still need a costume idea, Instacart says the top costumes sold in 2021 were peanut butter and jelly couples costumes, hippie costumes, and a banana costume. For the Fox News Rundown, I'm Gianna Gelosi.
Precise, personal, powerful. It's America's weather team in the palm of your hands. Get Fox weather updates throughout your busy day, every day. Subscribe and listen now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
David Marcus.
What's on your mind?
It seems that Jon Stewart has learned absolutely nothing over the past 2 years. In a stunning interview with Arkansas Attorney General Leslie Rutledge about proposed laws to restrict the medical gender transitioning of kids, the former funny man actually asked, "You're suggesting that protecting children means overriding the recommendations of the American Medical Association?" Yes, John, that is what is being suggested. Why? Because it was the AMA and the rest of the alphabet soup of medical advocacy organizations that supported school closing, masking kids, and a host of other restrictions that we now know harmed millions of them. They should have been overruled then and must be questioned now. All throughout the pandemic lockdowns, we heard it's not about politics, it's about science. That was and is a steaming bag of utter nonsense. Of course it was about politics. When broad public health policies like school closures are pushed into place, the ramifications affect all of society, and as such, they are political, not merely medical decisions. This is true of so-called gender-affirming care as well. That's because such medical procedures are about more than individuals and their doctors. In fact, such treatment requires that all of society buy into the metaphysical proposition that people can change gender, and requires opening women's sports, gender-specific spaces, and all the rest to obey the AMA and its allies like Stewart. There's another similarity at work here. From the earliest days of COVID-19, we knew its risk to children was extremely small. In order to protect a tiny, vulnerable population, our experts opted to harm almost all children. Likewise, in order to protect a tiny fraction of kids with extreme gender dysphoria who are allegedly at risk of self-harm without affirmation, all cases must be affirmed. According to a recent study, the number of children diagnosed with gender dysphoria in our country leapt from roughly 21,000 in 2019 to 42,000 in 2021, doubling in just 2 years. Whether this increase is a result of social contagion, greater acceptance, or anything else, it is folly to affirm every child who expresses any gender confusion at a tender age. Thousands and thousands of kids who may well have grown out of dysphoria naturally will be plunged into the lucrative assembly line of gender transformation, many in ways that cannot be reversed. More broadly, all of us and all of our children, churches, and culture will be browbeaten into the acceptance of a non-binary concept of gender that most Americans reject. If Stewart wants to sit there with the little look on his face, mugging to obedient fans about how superior they all are to ignorant Republicans, that's his business. But given what we have so recently gone through at the hands of these wise experts, he looks like an absolute fool. It was George William Russell who wisely wrote long ago that experts should be on tap, not on top. Of course, we must listen to and weigh what they say, but this time we must listen to all of the experts. Thank you very much. Not just the ones wearing expensive institutional blinders. Do not let Stewart or anyone else tell you that if you aren't a specifically selected doctor, you have no say in the questions of children and gender. We saw the havoc wrought by such thinking during COVID-19. America is not a tyranny of expertise, and Americans must never allow it to become one.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Jason in the House, the Jason Chaffetz podcast. Dive deeper than the headlines and the party lines as I take on American life, politics, and entertainment. Subscribe now on foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts.